All right. Welcome, everyone. It's Aadil Razvi once again. I'm a founding team member at Curve. I run sales, partnerships, and do live content like this. For this session, we're going to be learning about SaaS growth with two industry leaders that I'm super excited for the opportunity to chat with. We have the Director of Growth at Descript, the simplest editing software for podcasters and content creators. If you haven't checked it out, it is magic. It is a really, really cool. Previously, she had senior growth roles at Facebook, Indiegogo, and Pinterest. Thank you for joining us, Sandy Diao.
Yeah, great to be here.
We have the co-founder of Clearbit, the marketing data platform. He invests in software startups with his rolling fund, Earl Grey Capital. Welcome, Amit Vasudev.
Glad to be here.
So, Sandy, you started at Descript coming up on about a year ago. I would love to know the story and a little bit about the process of how you looked at the business and came up with a growth strategy.
Yeah, I'd love to share that with you. I am actually about half a year in, so just to correct that a little bit. And I was actually the first growth hire and marketing hire at Descript. So my journey was an interesting one. When I first was exposed to the product, I had a similar experience to a lot of our first customers where my mind was just blown. The fact that you could edit audio and video files by tweaking the transcripts on things. And for those who aren't familiar, by the way, Descript is basically an all-in-one audio video editor. And the idea is that you can import any sort of audio video file that will instantly transcribe into text, and you edit the audio and video on the basis of the text. So for example, if you wanted to snip out a particular sentence, remove filler words, all you have to do is hit the backspace button. So it's like an editor with a backspace key. And I sort of had that moment where I thought, this is so amazing. You know, this is really a tool that was built for the modern day content creator. And the way that the company innovated was very much thinking, what are the needs and what are some of the challenges that modern day content creators create without going back to some of the existing legacy tools like an Adobe or Final Cut Pro and saying, how do I make the timeline editing better? So I really admired that level of innovation. And in my initial conversations with the CEO, who's Andrew Mason, who actually has a bit of a track record in companies like Groupon, Detour, and various others, I actually sort of had to pitch myself as marketing being valuable to a company like Descript. And the history there is that Descript is very much a product-led growth company, in that a lot of the users in the podcast community love the product experience, and then they would tell their friends about it. And it just really grew virally through word of mouth in a way that's almost hard to encapsulate with any particular marketing channel or articulate as this particular strategy. But when we first chatted, we realized there were a lot of opportunities. For instance, with that channel of viral word of mouth growth, how do you productize that? Are there in-product experiences that you can build? And all of our customers are content creators. So if we could get more content creators to talk about Descript in their YouTube content, in their social content, could that generate a self-sustaining source of growth and user signups as well? So these were the types of conversations we had. And then we looked across the funnel and realized, actually, we have this SaaS business model where users come in, they have a free trial experience, and then they're supposed to see the value in that and then ultimately, purchase subscriptions. And so we started to uncover that we actually had this funnel that was operating, and there were opportunities across all stages: acquisition, activation, engagement, and even those who were subscribed would sometimes periodically or seasonally decide to unsubscribe. And so there were all of these questions, and we realized, gosh, we really need a team in place for this. So that's actually sort of how I pitched myself into our first growth marketing role at Descript. And pretty much since then, we've been realizing where all these opportunities lie. Like, for example, a few months ago, we realized, like, hey, product onboarding and email onboarding kind of serve different roles in our company because we have this desktop editor. And so to use email to drive a particular activation action may not actually make sense. So we realized we actually need someone to look at the lifecycle holistically. And there are all of these different areas where in product messaging, email-based messaging, other channels, these different touch points, we need a strategy around it. We need to help the customer get the information they need at the moment that they need. So, we are now hiring for a lifecycle marketing lead. And that's just sort of like part of the story of all these other roles that we're looking to build out at Descript. So that's a little bit around, how we first came in and looked at growth overall. And then, later in the conversation, I'm sure we'll get into more of the specific tactics around that.
Certainly. Oh, that's so cool. When you said you'd like productize the viral component, like what does that actually look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that the way we looked at it, there were probably three components to it. One of them, which we don't have today, but I think would be really valuable, and we hear a lot of users asking for it, is the idea that if someone is using Descript and they want to share the product experience with someone else, just simply as like, hey, this is really cool. Let me invite my friend. Let me invite my teammates. We should have, in-product experiences that make it super easy for you to add those email addresses or send those messages to people. And we have an initial version of that today where you can easily add Drive members to the Drive that you're working on, similar to like a Google Docs parallel there. You share the Drive with someone else. So that exists, but obviously, there's a lot more we can do there. The second aspect of it is, if you really think about it, all of our customers are producing some type of shareable content. And when they publish that video page or that hosted audio page, there's an opportunity for that to be seen by many, many other eyeballs. And when somebody opens that share page, that published page, they'll need to perhaps comment on it, collaborate on it. And there's this sort of need to create an account or sign in. So it creates this opportunity to drive this sign up loop through those share experiences. And then the final one I alluded to a bit earlier, we are very fortunate in that a lot of our customers who are content creators are creating things for their own content business or whatever it is they're working on. But they also talk about Descript as part of their workflows. And so we partner directly with, for example, YouTubers, podcasters, where they'll probably spend an entire episode or an entire video just talking about how magical it is to use Descript to edit their content and all the other tools that they use. So it's like a natural part of that discussion. But in that, they're sharing links to Descript. We have tracking in those links, and we can see directly how much traffic, signups, engaged users that those particular creators are driving. So those are the three elements of the virality that we've seen as opportunities here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's you're onto something when the natural word that people come up with when they describe your product is magical. That's the same word that came to mind for me. Amit, Clearbit has grown insanely fast over the last several years. Talk to us a little bit about that growth journey. Like, what was that hockey stick moment and how did you get to it?
Yeah, it's a good question. We were always pretty good, even the early days. Now, many things we did poorly in terms of conversion, but we were always pretty good at generating leads and demand. And I would say first and foremost, similar to Descript, a lot of that was due to two things. One, everybody wanting the solution to what Clearbit solved, which was more leads, more revenue. That's, there's not a lot of, that's a nice thing about being a thing that every company wants of all time. And then second, we made it really easy to try and use, and we had a lot of free products, and, we played to our strengths even in day one by creating more APIs and developer-centric stuff, even if over time we eventually realized, and really in the first few months of the business, that the absolute best customers were marketers. But we realized that to stand out in a somewhat crowded market, and for those that don't know, Clearbit's in the B2B data and data platform space, compete with ZoomInfo and the like. But to stand out against a lot of stodgy older companies, we said, let's make this really easy. Let's make it really light. Let's give away a bunch of free products and free data and use that to kind of stand out from the pack. So we had a lot of inbound pretty early on because we kind of used our strength of building a couple products, a couple lightweight things, and use that to kind of have a big net and create that awareness kind of from scratch, because there's a million startups out there. And we rode that really even to today. So we rode that into a relatively well-known brand in the space, kind of we tried our best, and I would say something we should have done a lot better. But we tried to. A lot of our customers had very creative things. Like a lot of our customers were some of the absolute most killer, intelligent growth marketers out there, and they would blow us away with what they do with the APIs and things, and we would actually go productize what they did. Like we had customers who would create forms on their website, which kind of like, we tried to copy Intercom and create stuff where companies would use Clearbit to do stuff that then other companies could see, similar to what they did with their badge. So if people built a form that auto predicts who they are and dramatically decreases the fields, like we would see people build out their API and look at each other and be like, why didn't we think of that? We should be productizing a form built on our own stuff. So we kind of used, I would say, the strength of our product and the fact that a lot of it was fairly visible, and our customers would do really creative stuff to kind of drive that. Now, in terms of revenue inflection point, the first year we went from 0 to 1 mil ARR. It was mostly self-serve with an average MRR per customer of like $100, $150. We tried to be very self-serve, but where things really jumped, and I know this is maybe heretical to say in today's age of everything product-led growth, is actually once we put a little bit more sales into the machine, and we, I think, kind of tried our best to understand how can we have the best of both worlds, where, because it's funny, I remember going to, I think it was at Dynamics before they IPO'd, and I was there, back when we started, I was everything from SDR to CRO to VP of security. The last one probably wasn't qualified for, but we'd go to them and they're like, this sounds great. We want to use you over, some big competitor, but you're too cheap and we don't trust you as a result. And it was like, okay, this is interesting. They're like, you're $199, you're $199 a month. What is this? And we realized that as badly as we wanted to be very dev friendly, this, that, and the other, Alex McCaw, who was our CEO, he was at Stripe before. So that was kind of his playbook was, he was one of the first engineers at Stripe. He's like, let's go bottoms up, self-serve all the way. Developers will just go crazy. But as we realized that our real customers who got the most value from the information and implementation were really marketing and revenue orgs, we realized that we had to try and marry the best of both worlds, where they bought a certain way, they wanted to talk to sales, and frankly, they wanted to spend a lot of money on this stuff, as per that example. And sometimes they didn't want to spend little bits of money, which is paradoxical. But we saw revenue go, so 0 to 1 in the first year, then 1 to 3 in the second year, and 3 to 8 in the third year. And the whole time we did that, we had 2 sales reps. So we did that in a very efficient way. So we kind of had the inbound coming in. We kind of built that net, built that machine with a lot of products. Again, decent job of marketing, decent job of brand. We'd have kind of our like short-term pops of things like Product Hunt and this and that. And then we'd really double down on the long-term things that kept on giving around, SEO and listicles. Are those still a thing? We do a lot of stuff there and have those created. And those together led to a lot of inbound. But we realized for certain use cases, for certain companies, well, maybe a $199 plan is not right for you. You're going to talk to the salesperson who's going to walk you away with a $30,000 a year contract, something like that, which in the scheme of things is still, a very, very high ROI investment. But that's what led to us kind of drastically improving our revenue. And a lot of investors we talked to and others actually assume Clearbit's a lot more self-serve than it is. The vast majority of the revenue actually comes from contracts and sales-driven contracts. But that doesn't mean that it's not fairly easy to use and start with. And you learn about Clearbit maybe in a free way or a cheap way. And then that leads to a much shorter and more efficient cycle once sales involved. So that's kind of that was really the secret to how we actually grew a lot faster. Wasn't as pure product led as, and again, product led is fantastic. It's actually, if we could have, we would have, but you have to be, I think, realistic about your customers, how they buy, the market, everything that rolls into that. So it's always a little bit more nuanced than sales or product driven. Ideally, you can combine both if it makes sense. That's what we do.
Yeah. It jumped out at me that in the story that you just told, people just weren't even taking you seriously because your product was priced too cheap. It almost devalued what it is that you provide by pricing yourself too low.
Absolutely, and to some extent, it's a good pricing is interesting. It's something where a lot of people say, oh, you don't want to be cheaper because it devalues your product or your value. It really depends. If you're kind of fundamentally disrupting a business model and largely through your technology, it's okay to win, especially as a baby against a bunch of adults. Like, win based on being cheap and easy. That's fine. But in a situation that we found ourselves in, where we're trying to share and say we provided the same value, if not more and better, because we were essentially providing like data into Salesforce, data Marketo, things like that. That, again, our customers were used to buying. They felt more trust if it was again, a contract, if it was of a certain size, and we were happy to take it. So I think without question, you want to be very, there's no right or wrong answer, but yeah, you want to be understanding of the market and what customers really think, because especially in B2B, it's never about like, I'm trying to save money. It's not their money, right? It's more about, does this generate return? And especially in bigger companies, will I get fired for putting this in? Sometimes that's more of a big deal than, am I saving the company money? And so, this kind of roots into, do you really understand your customer and their psychology? And that oftentimes, if you do, can lead you quite far.
Michael Chu's asking a really great question for you, Amit. If the typical customer is a marketer, how did developer APIs lead to growth versus, just being an additional feature?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And when we started the company, we didn't actually know that. About 3-4 months in, I remember talking to Alex, who again he's an absolute genius when it comes to product, and he talks developer. He doesn't talk marketer. He doesn't talk B2B sales. And I was like, look, this is where the business needs to go. It's almost like a pivot. We're like, we need to change this. We need to build a Salesforce integration. We need to, which again, for somebody like him, who's a master developer, he's like, made his ears bleed to be like, we need to build a Salesforce extension versus some killer SDK or API. But I think we realized that, and this maybe for those out there who are listening, that you're really at the beginning of your journey. You want to kind of really understand, where does your, on the curve of product market fit, where is the pain most acute, and where is your solution taking the customer furthest towards solving that pain? And for us, we started out actually building APIs because we wanted people to incorporate Clearbit data into their products. So I remember some of our very first customers were like calendar apps that would put little avatars in their calendar with pictures, because they'd ping one of our APIs that took an email and turned it into a picture. And that was all fine. And that was actually what we started out doing. But we took a hard look at it and said, look, this is more nice to have. Whereas we see customers just show up and say, I want to shorten my form. I want to have automated nurture for all of my inbound, and I'm using your API to do that. Gosh, it'd be nice if you just stuck the data in Salesforce for me. You have to take a hard look and put your ego away and say, these customers, number one, there's way more of them. I didn't go to business school, but it's like not that complex of an equation. There's a lot more of these customers, and they're willing to pay you a lot more. Whereas the sort of pure end product stuff was very nice to have. Now, the funny thing is, by doing well in the marketing side, we've since had many, many more partnerships where folks that want to use Clearbit in their product. But in the early days, those were nice to have, whereas this was must have. And so we started out with APIs not because of we didn't really understand the trend of what's actually happening in marketing, where marketing orgs are technical, they're doing crazy stuff with APIs. We kind of lucked into that because we started out with the wrong direction. And then we realized, holy shit, this is the future of marketing, all these, pretty technical folks. And then of course, those that aren't, we need to make it easy for them too and productize stuff. But today's marketing org is absolutely comfortable with APIs and things. So we kind of got lucky, to be honest.
Very interesting. Sandy, you've worked at companies like Facebook, Indiegogo, Pinterest, now Descript. I'm sure that you've tried out a lot of different tactics that may not have worked out the way that you thought they were. I would love to hear about a time, if anything jumps to mind, around a time when you were just so sure that something would work and it just totally fell flat, and maybe what you learned from it.
That's a really interesting question. Let me think of something that could be interesting to share. I think maybe I'll preface this with like one of the biggest differences I saw, and then I'll jump into a story from there, in working on growth at a company like Facebook or Pinterest compared to Descript. And I think this really underscores some of the differences in being part of a more mature business or a business with much larger numbers or a net base to work with, and how you think about growth successes in these different environments. So, the preface here is that when I worked at companies like Pinterest and Facebook, we always had this multi-million sized user base to really look for signal around whether an experiment was successful or if it wasn't. And so the framework there was always, let's have a test audience that receives this, we'll call it a treatment or program, and we'll always have some sort of control audience that doesn't receive it. And so it was always very clear when you had an idea or hypothesis around, like, let's send this, or let's give them a notification there, or let's test frequency, or test this channel and that channel. We always had a clear experiment result that told us, hey, we have X% statistically significant lift over the control. Therefore, this is the right thing to do. Now let's double down, let's roll it out, let's invest more here. Whereas at Descript, the equation looks dramatically different. And it's sort of an art and a science in some ways to say, hey, this looks promising. Like, we should double down here and we should build out the foundations of this, even if we don't have the full data behind it. So like a great example of that at Descript is SEO. We know that word of mouth, we know that organic discovery and having this domain authority is really valuable to us as a business. But if we start working on our content strategy today, if we start working on building domain authority today, in a month, in 2 months, we're actually probably not going to see that increase in traffic. We'll see intermediary metrics move, like search impressions or search clicks, but you're never going to quite be able to compare that apples to apples to another experiment you run on, for example, performance marketing, run a bunch of search ads or Facebook ads and drive a bunch of users. And so like the comparison there is really hard. And so on the story behind the search piece of it, one of the initiatives I worked on at Facebook as well was driving increased discovery of Facebook's business-facing products through SEO efforts, things like search ads, for instance, SEM in general. And so on the Facebook side, we looked at SEO as, hey, how do we get our subsites indexed and in relevant places? And to bridge that, we spent money in search ads as well. And that channel was insanely expensive for us. It was very cost ineffective. And part of it was that the rest of the business, we were also doing other things that were touching those customers as well. And so when you measure things like lift, you wouldn't see a huge increase or boost in your overall user acquisition. At Descript here, the story is really different. So speaking to the SEO side a bit, every single new blog content that we push out in the domain or the realm of content creation as a topic or related topics, we can see the graph move from impressions to clicks to CTR to actual traffic. And that's just something that I've never been able to see at Facebook. And then on the search ad side of it, we are able to get a very cost-effective acquisition cost for every user that we bring in through search. And we're targeting things that have very, very high intent, like someone looking up podcast editing software, video editing software, et cetera. And the conversion rates are just night and day difference. And part of it has to do with that volume and scale there. So the learning that I've had in looking across growth in these different size or different stages of companies is that you really can't think of success for some of these growth experiments as an absolute, like, hey, this is a success or not, and think about the evaluation criteria in the same ways. I think there are just so many other things to consider in every industry, customer set, and sort of the way that customers behave just differs so dramatically company to company. So there wasn't for me a sort of tried and true growth playbook that I could take with me from Pinterest and Indiegogo to Facebook and then to Descript. You really have to look at the business in isolation and really think about how these levers make sense in the context of your business. So just to wrap up on the search side of the house, that's a really great strategy that we want to continue to invest in at Descript. And we're going to continue to use paid as that bridge to that organic authority, fully knowing that when I compare the channels apples to apples in November, December, January, the numbers aren't going to look like, hey, this is a super successful channel quite yet, but it's going to be something that, has that payback period over the course of a year, 3 years, 5 years.
I'm curious, how did you actually prioritize that particular channel? Like, what made you, I guess, even taking a step back, like, how do you, Sandy, prioritize what growth activities to work on? More specifically, I guess, with Descript, since that's probably a closer stage to what folks in the audience are at.
Yeah, really great question. I wish I had a better answer for you. I actually feel like I could do a better job of prioritizing. Sometimes I see something really interesting, or I see sort of like a pocket of success, and I just want to, chase it. And part of that is, let's hire someone way smarter than me at this and have them work on this. So short answer is I could do a much better job at it. In the scheme of how I actually got things started, one of the first things that I think was really important for me to do to prioritize was sit in on as many customer calls as I could. And in doing that, I just wanted to understand, who our biggest advocates were, what they found most valuable about the experience, what questions they had that remained unanswered, how they heard about Descript. And for me, this basically translated into a more organized view of the different segmentation slices and breadth of channels that I would have to dive deeper into. So essentially, based on that somewhat organized view of here are the topical areas that I need to dig deeper into, I started to build this foundation for making sense of the Descript world through a combination of that data, of the historical events that the company had done, and also the feasibility of how can I get these channels and levers executed with, product changes being in many cases a big question mark, because we don't have a growth engineering organization. We don't have growth as part of the roadmap, so to speak. The things that are generally part of that roadmap are always, what are the new features? How do we fix these bugs? How do we launch the next version and generation of our products? And so it's this equation of what is highest impact, what is resource intensive, what is most feasible to execute, what does the team collaboration look like across these different areas. And that was sort of my sounding board for creating this prioritized list of what actually came through. And tying that to the SEO element a bit, when we looked at that data, when we looked at the historicals, when we looked at what historically drove growth for the business, it was that word of mouth element again. And part of it translated into Descript having, as a domain, having a ton of organic traction and domain authority because people love Descript. Our backlink strategy amazingly just sort of grows itself. People just love to do that. And so, how do we add on top of that? How do we accelerate that? And how do we double down and, 5x, 10x that? And so SEO was naturally sort of the direction that we came to. And so we wanted to enhance those discovery points and create almost this moat for ourselves in this domain, so that when you look up something like podcast software, you get Descript.com, you get our podcasting landing page, you get these sort of 10 components of the 10 most important components of creating a podcast, and all the resources and equipment and tools that you need as part of that. So that's sort of the thinking that went into that. And that's why SEO was one of the first things that we tackled.
There's something really relieving about when you're saying, Sandy, that even for you, it's a struggle to figure out prioritization. And I don't know, it makes me feel better about our own challenges at Demand Curve and sort of figuring out what to focus on. So thank you for that. Switching gears a little bit, Amit, if you were starting over today, and Sandy, I'll ask you maybe the same version of this question for a B2C SaaS, but for you, Amit, I'm curious. You're looking at a B2B SaaS company, maybe even one that you're considering investing in. I know you're looking at early stage B2B SaaS companies through your investment vehicle. How would you sort of think through mapping out the first 90 days of a roadmap? When you're starting from kind of nothing.
And to be clear, do you mean thinking of the roadmap in terms of acquisition, or about even just the company or the product?
Oh, just if you were in the business looking at a growth, creating a growth strategy, what would sort of be the sort of key things that you would be looking at or prioritizing, or and if you want to make it real with perhaps a company that you've looked at recently and seen
Sure.
what they're doing, go for it.
Yeah, well, obviously, step one is release a token. No, I'm kidding. That was a joke. Don't actually. Maybe you should. Maybe. This is not investment advice. Yeah, look, I think it's Sandy actually says something very important, that at this stage of company, the first 90 days is so absolutely critical. And look, assuming that there's a product, assuming there's some modicum of product market fit, you need to get hands-on with why they want your product, what the benefits are. I mean, today, I mean, shoot, we were in a crowded market when we started the company in 2015. Now I can't even imagine, because there's so much more SaaS. There's so much competition for attention. I think building that keen understanding is the only way to then decide what comes next. And to be more specific, again, and when we started at Clearbit, like I mentioned earlier, I was everything from SDR, chatting on the website, to just doing everything. And I think that actually ended up, all those reps ended up building a lot of intuition that went into the business strategy and what we ended up doing, including kind of that soft pivot, everything else. So I would say, because look, it's easy to come in and say, oh, let's do a bunch of outbound email, let's do a bunch of ads, let's do this, let's do that. But like Sandy said, the playbooks, I think, have to come from what the customers value, how they're thinking about your business. And it's okay to have a hypothesis that changes, but you have to have a hypothesis. And ideally that comes from some data. So I would say for a technical founder, and sometimes when we see businesses that are early, they don't necessarily have a business co-founder like I was to Alex on day one. So for them, it's and look, the nice thing is there's a lot of ways to get this information efficiently, right? Through surveying, through chat, through whatever. See what your initial users are thinking, and if you're in a beta and it's limited, which I see a lot too, which is smart. I mean, the Superhuman playbook, of course, is one that I see startups use over and over. And if you haven't seen that before, I would check it out. It's where you kind of very deliberately go and seek product market fit. Like they've kind of like made it, basically functional. But in doing that, at the heart of it is you're understanding how to make users happy, what makes them happy, why they're coming to you, why they're not coming to you. So from there, I would say, like, if it takes you 9 days to figure that out, do it. Because if you don't do that, there's not much else that's going to be that valuable that you can do down the road. Like some outbound campaign is going to be distraction if you're not even using the right messaging. All that said, let's assume you have some degree of that and you're like, okay, what can we do next? I would say work backwards from what you want for the business. Like, let's say you've got some funding, you're not running out of cash. You don't need to be like grabbing every shiny revenue object out there. And really it's more users. So for that, I think it's probably okay to do something splashy where you're offering free, getting folks using the product, creating buzz. Again, so much is free now. That's okay to, even if you should be charging more, should be charging, but you're kind of working backwards from, hey, let's get folks into the ecosystem. And then maybe we incent them to refer days 90 through 180, like think a couple steps ahead. So I would say, again, for Clearbit, we were very lucky that, our product org and Alex and Harlow and Andrew were so stellar that we could crank out products almost for our kind of growth hacks, if you will, and free things that would lead. But if you can do stuff like that, you should. Outbound email is actually pretty cheap. I would say, versus ads can get expensive fast. SEO, remarketing, again, first 90 days, I would call those maybe more like 90 to 365, like invest in remarketing and SEO, because they're like the gifts that keep on giving. And on the like intent curve, they're a little bit higher because they've already come to you. But outbound email is cheap. You can send it scalably. We actually wrote scripts at Clearbit that would, again, we were kind of like this type of company, but we would write scripts that would automatically find people and stick their pictures in emails and do all this crazy, growth hacky, creepy stuff. But it was actually relatively cheap because you could do it at volume. So if you're really like, I just need to get attention, it's not the worst thing to do. You may end up in a bunch of spam inboxes and this and that, but like, I don't know, set up some fake emails to do it with, or set up some new emails to do it with. Like, it's okay to do that stuff at the earliest of early stages. And then, yeah, but again, it goes back to, is your product and is the customer can they even use it without a conversation? Can they not? Of course, your website, there's really no excuse not to have that pretty well. I mean, nobody's really ever happy with their website, but for any startup now, like, it's funny, Alex and I had an argument in the early days. He came from Stripe. They're like the best company to design maybe ever. I don't know. But, and I still am a terrible design mind. I would be like, let's just, stick the right words on there. Like, it's all copy. It's B2B. Who cares? Like, and he would say, no, we're going to do all this, we're spending this money on design and all this stuff. And he was so right, because people thought we were 10 times bigger than we actually were. People would come to us and be like, oh, Clearbit, like, yeah, like this seems really polished. And this seems like it's not a 3-person company working out of Alex's apartment. And it'd be like, that's great. And that would, again, shorten sales cycles, help us get more brand recognition, whatever. So with the website, like, I would say, again, with all the products that are there today and all the contractors that are there and agencies, like, just make sure you're putting a good foot forward, even in the early days with your website, because you're going to work so hard to get them there. Like, make sure you look good, because otherwise they'll leave and they'll never come back. So that'd be another thing I'd say, that again, is another investment that'll keep on giving, and it's worth doing early as well. Sorry, that was kind of all over the place.
That was so good. No, in fact, there were like so many different like nuggets in there. I know that there are a bunch of people writing up public notes documents on these talks, and I know that there's going to be a ton from what you just dropped. But I mean, in essence, don't underestimate the first impression. I mean, it really does make a big difference. And so that's a good thing to keep in mind, even in the early days.
I would say, like, to kind of put a bow on it, it's like early days. If you're a technical founder, you don't have quote unquote co-founder who's a business person. I mean, ideally you should, but if you don't, or somebody who you can trust to kind of be like, founder level person who's owning that side of it, get in touch with customers if you're not already. Think about how they want to interact with what you have, and that's totally dependent on what you have and the value you're creating. Remove the friction. Don't be shy about getting out there. Like, do mass things, do splashy things, give it away. Like, optimize globally, not locally. But that works backwards from where you are in terms of capital and this and that. And then, if you've got a business person, like, they should be owning all this stuff. If not, that's an issue.
Sandy, we've I wanted to talk to you about how you would think through with a B2C SaaS. We actually got a good question in the Q&A, and I'm curious to hear how you would reason through just sort of how you would approach this. Fareed is asking, the bulk of our revenue, and it's for getstoryshots.com, which is a website for, I believe, book summaries. And they've tried to raise the price in the hopes of increasing recurring revenue. While that helps, we see the question jumped. We see a sharp decline in overall revenue. Our audience seems to be subscription fatigued and prefers to pay once and be done with it. What should we do? How should we think about it?
Got it. Maybe I'll tackle that one first, and then I'll sort of dive into a little bit of the, like, what do we do as sort of the first 90 days of it all. So I don't have a specific prescriptive answer here, but a few things that would be interesting to think about. And I'll pull an anecdote from something that we did at Descript recently. So I think the pricing question is really interesting, because there's the idea that you could increase price. There's also this idea that you could drive users to purchase for 1 year upfront or 2 years upfront, or do some sort of like discount level that increases their overall purchase value right off the bat without having to increase the price there. So I think some of those decisions, you'll have to just sort of understand the economics of your business and what it is that you're offering. But some of the pricing levers, like, don't always have to be, increasing the price upfront. But I think one of the stories that I'll share here is that about a few months ago, we had a trial experience for one of our paid pro tiers, and that was, $30 a month. We have another tier for paid subscriptions that's $15 a month, so that's about half that. And the difference is that you get access to a more pro tier of editing features, like, for example, voice cloning. You can remove advanced filler words, etc. And so we had a 7-day free trial experience leading into that. And we saw this majority of users that were on free accounts entering that pro subscription trial and then paying for the pro account. And so we thought, in users' minds, the expensive tier or the more valuable tier here is that one, because more users are picking that one. And so we actually recently removed that trial experience, where we think about now Descript as when you download the app and you're using it for free with the 3 transcription hours that you get, like, that whole thing is the trial. Like, there's no fancy mechanism of collecting your credit card or doing all of that. We just reduce the friction and remove all the barriers to you getting to that point of value and understanding what the product does. So we don't call it trials anymore. We don't say, like, get this free thing or whatnot. And so now what's really interesting about that is we're seeing that the overall ratio of users going towards that package or that plan is not necessarily true anymore. perhaps going into the future. And so I think like, I don't have I don't have the answer to Fareed's question here exactly, but I do think one of the things that you really need to understand is for you increasing the revenue or increasing the price on these particular plans, like what is it that you're incrementally offering them? And what is it that they value about the purchase? And is it worth that increase in price? Like, I think if you actually talk to the customers, you'll find that there's probably one or two things that they're paying for out of the list of a dozen things that you're offering as part of that subscription. So the sort of short of it is, I think that if you're thinking about increasing the price in hopes of increasing recurring revenue, I think you really need to talk to the current customers that are paying and just really understand, like, you think that they're subscription fatigued and they just like want to pay once. Is that really true? Is there a more seasonal use to their, the product there? Do they always need the product? Would they be happy to just sort of like not think about it and pay one time for it? So I think the answer lies in connecting with the customers and really understanding that.
Got that.
Yeah.
It seemed like you wanted to jump in as well.
Yeah, I mean, that I'm having PTSD even hearing this question. We had that. We had that pain so deeply at Clearbit, and even today to some extent. I mean, because basically at Clearbit, especially in the early days, the product was basically data. It was, here's information about your users, and every single day people would say, look, I just have an email list. I don't want to use your API. I'm not technical, and I don't know how to code. I don't want to use the API, and also I just want the damn data, and I don't want to do anything after that. Like, let me do it. And we fought it in so many stupid ways. We made it, like they had to fill out a questionnaire before they'd cancel, and they'd have to do this and that, like so many ill-conceived ways. What I would say, Fareed, and I'll keep it short, is the real answer comes in the product. Is there real recurring value or not? And the market's ultimately efficient. And if not, then, you're not going to be in for a good time. There'll be a lot of churn. There'll be a lot of people coming on, coming off. Or if you kind of make it harder, create friction, again, depending on your stage, that could be a death sentence. If you're not well-known already, you don't already have a lot of inbound, and you don't have bigger customers will pay you more. But if you do, then maybe that's the right decision for the business. Like for Clearbit, to some extent, we ended up doing that. We built products that were much more recurring in value, like, oh, enrich all your inbound leads. Like that's not something people are going to turn off because every single day they're getting inbound leads. Whereas if it was like, hey, I want my CSV to be enriched, like we literally created a part of the website. It's like, you just need that. Just go here. You're not going to get support. You're not going to talk to anybody. Go do this. And that's just not a segment that we valued in terms of sales, marketing, and even how we recognize revenue once you're much bigger. But the market's efficient. And like, if the real answer, I would say the best answer comes from, can you adjust your product and services to create natural recurring values? That's not like a big issue. And then after that, if not, then, I think then you can start to think about customer segments and, like you said, pricing, discounts and things, but it's not some panacea. Like ultimately the market's really efficient. So trust me, we faced this the hard way and did not get it. And we pushed back in all the stupidest ways versus just doing the right answer. We should have just done that on day one.
The market is really efficient. It's telling you what you need to know. You got to be able to listen is what I'm hearing from that.
Yeah. And look, if the trade-off is there's certain customers who don't want your subscription and they're not right, like, I mean, do the math. Be like, do I have a TAM? Do I not? Like, what type of business is this going to be if I make this trade-off? Like, that's okay. That happens.
Brooks is asking a great question. In complex SaaS sales, at what point do you, to take the words out of your mouth, Amit, put sales into the mix? Specifically, like what are buying signals and content suggestions outside of lead scoring and requesting a demo? Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, and look, to be clear, we first brought the sales folks on in 2016. First, two people, again, very talented guys who, were not your average AE at a 100-person company. They had, I think one of them had been founder and other had a lot of experience. They were good at like kind of helping build the playbook entirely, not just come in and sort of, read from a script. So they're very talented individuals. But that said, why do we do it? Well, I think it came from, again, some of what I observed and some of the patterns we observed with, hey, companies want to talk to somebody anyway, right? So that doesn't make sense if you're selling something for $99 a month. And again, some of our developer API customers were like, I never want to talk to anybody ever. In fact, I always found it funny where I was like, hey, I'm one of the co-founders, like, let me help you. I just want to like help you. And they're like, fuck off. Like, I'd be like, all right, fair enough. Strange, but hey, that's how they are. That's how they are. Whereas others who are like, look, I have a bunch of questions. I want to implement this a certain way. I want to, again, I'm comparing you to somebody else, like, kind of came organically from, oh, they want to buy this way. And if they do, it'd be pretty silly not to help them buy that way and then also make a lot more money in the process. So some of it's market and customer driven. I would say today versus even 4 or 5 years ago, a lot more is expected in terms of PLG, free, easy to use. So I would still try and push that as far as you can and not hire sales until, there are very clear markers to do so, such as, hey, I can dramatically drive ACV. I'm running into this high cost of sale anyway, except I don't have salespeople who are getting the benefit of it. And people want to talk and do those types of things. But I would say if you can try and kind of think atomically about the buying cycle, it's like, what are customers? What are their objections? What are they running up against? Do they need help kind of with vision of like, oh, this is how you need to use the product? That can be maybe solved over time with content and content marketing, but making, some early investments in sales, if it leads to that, it's okay. You don't want to overdo it because that'll kind of torpedo. It'll just make it really hard. But I would say, yeah, it really still is market and customer buying driven at the heart of it. And for us, it was just, painfully, obviously, we have to go that direction. But I think a lot of our customers, a lot of Clearbit's customers are some of the best PLG companies out there, Slacks, the Notions, the Airtables. They all have sales now. In fact, I remember being at a meeting with Slack's CMO. They were like, this is back when they were young, and they used our Salesforce product, and they were like, we're never going to hire salespeople. There was like some article, and then like an hour later, they're like, hey, we need 100 seats for the Salesforce thing. And I'm like, huh, funny. I thought you had no salespeople. But look, that came again later on when they're call it more like account management. Like maybe you can get a lot of customers in PLG, you don't charge them a lot, and then you have people go and kind of farm them versus hunt them. So I would try and stay product led just because it'll help you be a lot faster, and it'll honestly force you to build a better product probably. And as Sandy alluded to, like product doesn't always just sort of sell itself. You've got to institute the growth loops and institute the right stuff in the product onboarding and experience to sort of promote them to take the actions and do the behavior they want. But that said, and I forget the question, I think you mentioned something about the funnel. Yeah, like if people are dropping off towards the end, for example, they're trying it out, they're not using it, and something's stopping them, like I would go dive in and check out the conversations, whether they're recorded, or go try to talk to them yourself. Like you can kind of very quickly, unscalably test some of this stuff and understand why aren't they buying. And in some cases they may say like, oh, I didn't know this is the thing I need to do. And so you make a decision. Either I stick a salesperson in there, or I need to find a way to better educate them either directly in the product or otherwise. And this goes back to your strengths. If you're a product CEO, probably more scalable to try and make the changes in the product, but if not, it's okay to bring the sales in too, provided they, are generating the revenue that you need to justify it.
Amit, you've given Brooks quite a bit of homework. I feel like they're set for the next few months. Wrapping up, Sandy, you made this big transition from later stage growth to early stage growth. What are some resources that you would recommend that folks check out that maybe helped you along your journey as you were thinking through early stage growth?
Yeah, great question. So one of the pieces of curriculum that I really recommend alongside the demand curve content is I took some time earlier in my career to really connect with other people who were in growth. And what was really helpful about that, even if they were working on really different types of businesses, is, as we all know, I think the landscape of tools is evolving very, very quickly. And things like automation tools and things like analytics tools, they just change so quickly. And it's really helpful to understand what other companies are utilizing, understanding their pros and cons and strengths and weaknesses. And just using that not as necessarily a trigger to say, like, let's switch ours to match exactly what this other company is doing, but just more so to understand, here are some of the ways that we can be more efficient in scaling some of the work that we do on the growth side. So to build those connections, I actually took a class that was under Reforge, which is a retention and engagement course. And it was just a deep dive into some of the terminology around how to think about retention and engagement. And also it was just the thing I took away from that the most was just being connected to a really, really great community out there. So I thought that was really great. And of course, there are tons of blogs coming out of some of those instructors and many, many instructors out there in the world. I don't think it would be fair to name all of them in this conversation, but I think it's definitely something we could follow up on that I think are just really great. But honestly, the thing that helped me the most in being able to just really understand what I wanted to do is having really spent a lot of times across the breadth of different marketing channels and just being a really strong generalist and understanding things at a sort of basic level around data science, paid advertising, SEO, influencer marketing, content marketing, et cetera, and just really understanding how to be a strong marketing generalist, and then sort of picking a few of those areas to become knowledge experts and go deeper. And if you realize, hey, like I'm not the right person to go deeper into these areas, you have enough a basic understanding to know how to hire someone and find the relevant skill sets to grow out your team. So for me, those are some of the important things that I think about when I'm thinking about how to better educate myself to become better and better at growth marketing.
Thank you. Amit, any rapid fire resources you want to rattle off?
So the nice thing is nowadays there is so much content out there, right? Like so many things that like I had questions over, 5-6 years ago now are like, there's like 20 articles about them. So I would just say devour stuff online, Slack communities, Twitter communities. Again, there's just a lot of that even comes from, what are your customers doing? There's just a million ways to go find this stuff organically. That said, let's just say you don't know a lot about ads and you want to learn. The fact that there's now so many amazing agencies and contractors that are relatively economical. Like I often talk to startups who are like, hey, I have, I need to make this like perfect unicorn first growth hire, and I can't do anything until then. Like, we're not going to like do anything in growth. I'm like, no, go work with these experts, agencies, and like use that to help you understand the hire you even need to make and like where the gaps are, but like learn from them. So I think there's just so many folks practicing doing good stuff out there that like, contractors, if you can afford it, agencies, if you can afford it. And then I would just, again, be active in growth communities and just, read all that's out there. Like, and, you can choose what you want to use or not use, but, there's kind of no excuse to not learning a lot of this stuff on your own.
Awesome. This has been such a good session. I'm taking a ton of notes myself, and I know that this is a recording I'm going to go back and watch. From both of you, would love to just hear, what are you up to right now that folks should know about, and how can they get in touch? Yeah, Sandy, why don't you take us away?
Sounds good. So would love to take this opportunity to reiterate. I think we're working on something really special here at Descript. We're building a content creation tool from the ground up, and it's for the modern day creator. And we have so many cool, interesting sort of turns and changes in the industry happening right now. And we're hiring engineers, product people, designers, marketers, you name it. And on the marketing side, we have tons of opportunities across lifecycle marketing, acquisition, content, product marketing. So definitely shoot me a note if you're interested, sandy@descript.com, and would love to learn. Would love to take the opportunity to tell you more about what we're building here at Descript.
Cool. One other random growth hack before I plug. I was wondering, with the US dollar being inflated so much, I was like, can you just go and offer customers like 5-year contracts now at a cheaper price point? Because in 5 years, they'll have to pay like $100 more. I was thinking about that. I was like, oh gosh, should I suggest that to everything? See how that goes. So again, feel free to ping me on Twitter or email. I'm sure we'll share all that info afterwards. But look, Clearbit's hiring as well, always. And of course, if you're a company, probably, once you've got product market fit, once you've got leads, revenue, of course, check out Clearbit, let them know you talk to me, or of course, anything else. And, Clearbit has a lot of stuff for really any B2B company that's looking to make those revenue numbers work. And then, of course, as Aadil mentioned, most actively now, I'm running an investment firm called Earl Grey Capital, and we do everything from pre-seed to Series A investing. So, of course, if you're in the market for that, feel free to ping us as well, and we'll do our best to potentially see if we can partner.
So good. Many people are saying this is the best session so far. I know that there's been so many gems dropped. Thank you both for being so generous with your time. You can just go ahead and I'll see you backstage. You can switch there. We're going to go ahead and kick off the next session in about 5-ish minutes. So catch y'all then.